Let's get started. Hello, intellectual wanderers and UPSC aspirants. Welcome to our YouTube channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. We are starting with our lecture number 22, and we are going to see one of the most fascinating political thinker in the lineage of Western political thought, and he is sixth in the line, that is John Locke. He is again one of the greatest political thinker from the European lineage, whose theory is quite contrast to that of the Hobbes, but he is also contemporary to Hobbes, and hence when we saw the thought or the thought of Hobbes on social contract, we will also be seeing his theory on social contract, which is complete juxtaposition to that of the Hobbes in very contrasting matter. He is giving a very different perspective on social contract, on sovereignty, on the state, as his contemporary like Hobbes, Filmer, and etc. As we will unravel his political journey, we will get to understand many fascinating philosophies and many fascinating thoughts of John Locke, which is not only pertinent for our UPSC optional exam purpose, but also for our lives. We will get to understand different politico-administrative philosophy behind the constitution that we still have in our country and many European and Western countries. Many European constitutional aspects are influenced by the thinking of John Locke. And as we will see his journey of political philosophy, we will get to understand many diverse and vivid concepts with greater clarity. But without any further ado, let's get started. But I would love to have you all subscribe to the channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG, and also show your love by liking the video. Alright, so let's get started with the lecture. So this is the table of content. Alright, we will be starting with the first part, that is introduction, okay, which will mainly introduce the life and time of Locke, who Locke was, from where he belonged, what was the major works of Locke, what were the major influences on the Locke, which mainly shaped his political ideologue or political thinking or perspective on different matters, which was prevailing during his time. Then we will see his magnum opus, that is two treatises on the civil government, right? So this is the magnum opus of Locke, right? It is basically a constitution of two different volumes. That is the first treatise on the civil government and the second treatise. Right? Then we will be seeing Locke's view on human nature, which is basically a content on the second treatise on the civil government, right? Then again we will see his perspective on state of nature. Then Locke's social contract, which propounds his theory of origin of state. Then finally we will see Locke's view on rights and property, then Locke on revolution, and we will be ending Locke by doing the critical assessment of Locke, where we will also be covering the criticism which is made on Locke by different contemporary philosophers or political thinkers, right? With this, we will be completing holistically the thinker that was John Locke. All right. So this is how the table of content looks like. So let's start with introduction. That is the first part of John Locke, right? So introduction, which will mainly speak about life and time of Locke, who Locke was. So the grandiose picture that you can see on the slide is none other than the quote that is greatest of all time, John Locke himself. All right. So John Locke is one of the greatest figure in the history of political thought. Why here he is venerated as the greatest figure in the history of political thought? We will get to understand it when we voyage through his tapestry, through his political journey. Right? He was a renowned English philosopher who was born in the year 1632 in the family of Puritan lawyers. Right? He too studied at Oxford. He was a physician by profession. Right? He started as a physician. He did his education in medicine from Oxford. Then he got associated with Lord Ashley. We will see. You have to remember him because he will have one of the most influential influence on Locke and on his political perspective, because Lord Ashley, who is basically the Chancellor of England, got Locke into the political sphere, right? He started as a physician, but his association with Lord Ashley led him to experience the political realm of England during those times, right? So gave him an opportunity to become a political philosopher. Later on, Locke fled to Holland with Lord Ashley to take refuge, where he found a free society in operation. He came to contact with William of Oranges. Okay, here William of Oranges, Lord Ashley, and the Glorious Revolution becomes very important, because these were the figures who will have very important and prominent influence on John Locke and his political perspective. Okay, so let's move further. With the fall of Stuart monarchy, William of Oranges was called to England to occupy the vacant throne. Okay, so what happened basically during the Glorious Revolution, there was a monarchy, okay, a Stuart monarchy, which had fallen, and William of Oranges, that is William III of England, was called to occupy the vacant throne after the fall of Stuart the monarchy. Okay, the new king appointed him as commissioner of appeals. When the William III, that is William of Oranges, is a political dynasty or a ruler dynasty, okay, they have appointed Locke as a commissioner of appeals. Okay, in this way, Locke had long patronage to Royal of England. Another turning point in his life was when he witnessed the Glorious Revolution of England in 1688. This silent revolution established supremacy of people over monarchy, right? So this is what a Glorious Revolution was. It was a silent revolution which established supremacy of people over monarchy. Basically, they have the people, the majority, have overthrown the monarchy in order to establish their supremacy, right? It was a silent, bloodless revolution. This made Locke feel that people were efficient and capable enough to decide their own government, and also could sit in judgment over the action of their sovereign. Right? So, look, now take into the consideration Hobbes and his Puritan Revolution, which was a kind of civil war, a bloodshed and chaotic situation, right? Which led him to come to the conclusion that people are selfish, brutish in nature. They are chasing power and power after power just to satiate their selfish pleasure, right? But at the same time, here is a Locke who has experienced a glorious revolution, right, which was more silent in nature, which was very bloodless in nature, right, which mainly replaced or established supremacy of people over monarchy. And what was the influence of glorious revolution of Locke? The Glorious Revolution made Locke feel that the people were efficient and capable enough to decide their own government in very responsible manner, and also they could sit in judgment over the action of their sovereign. They can also be responsible over the action of their sovereign, whom they have entrusted upon, right? So these are the different influences of different times on different thinkers. On one hand, we have Hobbes, who took a Puritan revolution in very pessimistic manner, because that particular revolution had kind of negative impact on Hobbes. But at the same time, there is a glorious revolution which is being called as more bloodless revolution by Locke, which had very optimistic, positive influence on Locke, which finally made Locke feel that people were efficient and capable enough to decide their own government, and also could sit in judgment over the action of their sovereign, right? So these are the various influences. We will also be dealing with the influences in greater detail in the later slides as well, right? So John Locke is also known as father of liberalism, right? Why he is known as father of liberalism? Very important question, right? We are venerating or regarding John Locke as the father of liberalism, but why? Political liberalism is a theory of limited state. Okay, so here, what is political liberalism? Political liberalism is basically a theory of limited state, right? Rights of citizens to limit power of the state. Here, rights of the citizens are given more priority over the powers of the state, right? So let's diverge from the topic and see what are the different types of rights. Right, what are the different types of rights which which will have a limitations on the powers of the state or the sovereignty of the state, right? So basically there are three types of rights. The first is customary rights, which are basically based on customs and traditions, right? Like religion. According to my religion, I have right to faith, I have right to worship. That is basically a customary law, which is basically rendered to me based on my custom and traditions. If I belong to this particular tradition or custom, I have right to follow my own rituals, right? So that is the example of customary right. The second is the legal right. What are the legal rights? So legal rights are the one which are given to the citizens by state or law, right? A covenant is a source of right, then it is a legal right, right? The third kind of right, and which will be more important, especially in terms of Locke, is natural right. What is natural right? So the right which is sourced by nature and not by the state, which is given by nature, right, and not by the state, is known as natural right. So keep this natural right in the mind, which we will be seeing in this particular slide, which says that the theory of natural rights, which finally gave the title of father of liberalism to Locke, right? And we will also establish this particular conclusion when we will be finishing his second treatise, that is his magnum opus, when we will be dealing with his theory of origin of state, how differently he took on his theory of origin of state in contrast to Hobbes, in contrast to Filmer, right? So natural rights are given to man by nature and God, and hence state cannot deprive a person from these rights against their wish, right? As in Hobbes as well, we have seen how the right to life was an absolute right. Why? Because it was a right which was given by the God. It was not given by the God, and hence it became the absolute right. And even state do not had an arbitrary right to deprive one from their right to life, right? The similar thoughts are being carried by Locke as well, where he says that the natural rights are given to man by God or nature, and hence cannot be deprived by the state according to their own wish in arbitrary manner. Every fundamental is natural right. Here this is something which is very, very important. Every fundamental is natural right, and hence it becomes what? It becomes sacrosanct, right? It becomes sacrosanct, which cannot be easily muted, right? And hence every fundamental right is natural right. But the reverse might not be true, right? Every natural right does not necessarily be a fundamental right. The theory of natural right is also the basis of human rights, which we practice even to this day. Locke is a scholar of capitalist class. Why we are saying Locke as a scholar of capitalist class? Why? Because he has given the justification for absolute right to property, right? As Hobbes was also the scholar of capitalist class, he is also the scholar of capitalist class. Why? Because he is giving, Locke is giving absolute, the justification for absolute right to property. We will see his view on property in the later lecture series, but just for the reason that he has given the justification for absolute right to property, he is being regarded as the scholar for capitalist class. And hence his perspective on different political theories will be based on more individualistic, more utilitarian nature. Okay, hence he is also the scholar of possessive individualism. Locke has given the theory of separation of power, principle of toleration, and majoritarian democracy, right? So these three important elements of Locke's theory will stand valid throughout his political theory. That is, first, separation of power. He will always strive to establish strict separation of power when it comes to state and citizens, right? State will only have limited power because rights of citizen will always stand supreme to the limitation of the state or to the power of the state. Hence there shall always be a strict separation of power. Even this day, right, we have this concept of separation of power, and Locke is someone who has explicitly propounded the idea of separation of power, right? which is even in use till date, right? The second is principles of toleration, right? There will be a threshold, or there will be a point where the state will have to follow the principles of toleration, right? And the third is majoritarian democracy, which will basically talk about the power of the citizens, right? So these are the three elements of Locke which will stand valid throughout his journey of political theory, right? Locke also belonged to the tradition of social contract, as was the Hobbes. We will see in greater depth in his second treatise on the civil government, basically his theory on social contract, right? Locke also belongs to England. He has witnessed glorious revolution. Since he has witnessed peaceful change, he developed more balanced view of human nature. Again, this is in contrast to Hobbes, right, who takes more critical perspective on the human nature and thus formulates his social contract by giving rise to, or by giving birth to, his absolute sovereign state, that was Leviathan, which will know no limitation or foundation. Here Locke has witnessed a glorious revolution, right, which is kind of very peaceful power change from monarchy to republic, a democracy, right? And hence his perspective will be more balanced. More balanced about what? More balanced view about human nature, that humans are responsible species. They know how to stand on the sovereign decisions they have made, right? So this is what the theory of natural rights, which will basically a basic premise upon which entire Locke's theory will be based upon. Okay, now let's see his major works. What are the magnum opus of Locke, right? So Locke wrote as many as 35 books, right? But his important works in his philosophy are his letters on totalitarian toleration, right? So first work is his letters on tolerations, right? And the second work that is also the magnum opus is his treatises on civil government, right? So this is basically a volume of two treatises. Okay, the first treatise is basically refuting the Filmer, and second treatise devoted to the social contract on the origin of state. Okay, so the first volume or the first treatise, they are basically criticizing or refuting the idea which was propounded by Filmer. Okay, we will see in greater detail what Filmer propounded, or what is the idea about state, like Filmer state, right? But first treatise is completely refuting the idea of Filmer, so as to establish a completely unique government or give a unique origin of state in his second treatise by establishing or giving or propounding his idea of social contract. Okay, so but essence of his political thought is found in his book second treatise. Why? Because the second treatise is the book which talks about his theory or his perspective of the origin of state, right? So he was the father of political liberalism, as we have already discussed, a great champion of the rights of men, a prophet of consent in politics. That is why his social contract is the product of, right? He will always give more priority to the consent of the majority in politics, rather than establishing or giving an arbitrary power to an absolute state, and great supporter of the course of individuals. Okay, his political philosophy was contained in two essays with the sole object of defending the glorious revolution, right? So this is the idea. Now let's see some of the major influence on Locke. Okay, each and every political thinker is influenced by his time, and Locke was no exception to this, right? So what is the basic agenda behind doing the influence on Locke? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to understand the influence, right? Because now forget about Locke, just think about yourself. You are the person, and who, since your childhood to the present time, who were the major influences upon yourself, right? They are basically your parents, they are basically your teachers, they are basically your friends, they are basically your role models, right? And based on their influence upon yourself, your perspective will be shaped. If you have a great role model, let's say if your role model is our honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi, your political perspective will be shaped according to his perspective. If your role model is, let's say, Pandit Nehru, you will have more socialistic approach towards politics. If your parents are very particular about timings, there are chances that it will also have a positive influence upon you and it will shape your character accordingly, right? Similarly with teachers and friends, right? So these are the basic or major influences upon one's life. Similarly, there were very important influence on Locke as well, which helped him shape his political perspective. So we can also restate this like the political philosophy which is being credited to Locke has been also influenced by some of the great names that we will be seeing in this particular section, that is influence on Locke, right? So let's see who were the major influence on Locke, right? So first, his association with Earl of Saxbury. Okay, as already said, so basically who was the Earl of Saxbury? He was basically the Lord Ashley, the one you can see in the picture. Okay, he was the basically Earl of Saxbury. And as already said, from the very start of Locke came in contact with Lord Ashley, okay, who was the founder of Whig Party of England, and hence he became the first Chancellor of England as well. As we have already seen in the introduction part that Mr. Locke was started as a physician at Oxford, right? But his association with Lord Ashley led him to come closer to the political realm, or so as to say that he was the person responsible to bring Locke into the political philosophy. His association with Lord Ashley gave him an opportunity to have a direct experience of practical political affairs, right? So first major influence is his association with Earl of Saxbury, right? Now let's see the second influence. Who was the second influence? The second influence is basically a event, that is Glorious Revolution of, this will be 1688, not 1788. Okay, the second powerful influence on Locke, or rather the starting point of his philosophy, was the Glorious Revolution, right? So there is situation in everyone's life which have a great impact on one's life, right? Even in our life we have certain situation which kind of completely revolutionizes our perspective, our way of thinking, right? From that particular situation we start taking life very differently, very seriously, and sometimes very responsible as well. The similar event in the Locke's life was Glorious Revolution of 1688. So let's see what kind of impact or influence Glorious Revolution had on the Locke. Just as Hobbes got the clue to his philosophy from the Civil War, that was Puritan Revolution, Locke found it from the Glorious Revolution, in which English people peacefully and bloodlessly overthrew their monarch and established a more responsible government. Okay, as in the case of Hobbes, the situation was of Puritan Revolution, which was more chaotic, a civil war like situation, which was more bloodful, right? In case of Locke, the situation was Glorious Revolution, which was more peaceful in nature, more bloodless in nature, and it basically was replacement of monarchy and establishment of more responsible government. So situation was not very chaotic, situation was very peaceful. This had a great impact on Locke. He formed a good opinion about human nature, right? As we have seen in Hobbes, how he devolved his idea of social contract by discussing his perspective on state of nature, where he had very pessimistic or negative view about human nature. Then he talked about his concept of state of nature, where the state of nature is a state of war of all against all. Then he devolved his idea of social contract. The similar flow can be traced also to the Locke, right? But his source point, that is Glorious Revolution, is very different. It is very peaceful, right? Hence his hence his perspective on nature of humans will be very positive, right? his state of nature will be very positive, and his finally his social contract will be based on more responsible government, because people are responsible enough to stand on the decision that they are formulating or mutually agreeing, right? He learned from the revolution that men are quite capable of ruling themselves. It is not like in the case of Hobbes, where he established that men are not capable because men are dominated by the pleasure. Men will chase power after power, which seizes only upon the death, and hence the power chasing game will become a zero-sum game, because there is no end to the power chasing game. Right? Here Locke is propounding the idea that men are quite capable of ruling themselves. It is completely opposite of what Hobbes has propounded. The Glorious Revolution was bound to mold the concept of human nature in Locke's philosophy, as did civil wars in the case of Hobbes. This is very much explicit in whatever I have just discussed. Okay. The third major influence was Filmer, Hobbes, Hacker, and Sidney. We will see each of them. The third powerful influence was influence on Locke was that of Filmer, okay, Hobbes, Hooker, and Sidney. Okay, both Filmer and Hobbes supported absolute government. We have already seen Leviathan in case of Hobbes in the previous lecture, right? If you haven't watched the previous series, I would love to have you all watch that, because if you haven't watched the previous lecture, this is very less likely that you will be able to sustain the flow of understanding, right? And if you will understand the previous lecture comprehensively, the thread of flow of thoughts will remain throughout the lectures, and you will be able to connect to different concepts very effectively, right? So both Filmer and Hobbes supported absolute government, though on different grounds, right? The Filmer's absolute government and Hobbes' absolute government were kind of same, but they both were influenced from the different grounds. Filmer, in his book Patriarcha, right, this is the work of Filmer, enunciated the theory of divine origin of state and justified the restoration of Stuart kings. Okay, so in his work that was Patriarcha, he clearly explained the theory of divine origin of state and justified the restoration of Stuart kings. Okay, what does this mean? What does this divine origin of the state means, right? So basically Filmer will talk about the divine origin of monarchy, divine origin of the state, that is monarchy, where he will say that the kings or the rulers are the son, right, or the heirs, the son of the god. The Adam was the first king who was the direct heir or son of the god, and the later kings are the son or grandchildren of God, and hence they have the divine right to rule over the mankind. And hence, on the basis of his divine origin of state, he justified the restoration of Stuart kings who were replaced by the William of Oranges, that is William III of the England. So this is what a divine origin of state means. We will also be talking this particular divine origin in greater detail in the later slides as well. Okay, so Hobbes had justified this is what a Filmer idea of absolute state was. Now let's see what Hobbes' idea was. Okay, Hobbes had justified the absolute monarchy on the basis of utility. Okay, Locke was in favor of constitutional government. He has taken a kind of balanced perspective. Why? Because his major influence was Glorious Revolution, where he had kind of positive perspective on human nature. Okay, which should work for the welfare of people, right? Which will constitutional government or responsible government, which will work for the welfare of people. This was the basic idea of whom? Locke, right? Filmer is propounding the idea of state, that is absolute state, on the basis of divine origin of state, that is the kings are the son of God and they have the divine right to rule over the mankind, right? And Hobbes had justified his idea of absolute state based on utility, that there will be social contract where men will come into a mutual agreement to form a social contract, so that a Leviathan or an absolute supreme or sovereign state, that is Leviathan, can ensure their right to life and right to property. This is on the basis of utility, that we are formulating a sovereign state which shall protect our right to life and property. Okay, so that was Hobbes' idea about absolute state. Okay, but Locke is taking a more balanced view by propounding the idea in favor of constitutional government, which will be more responsible, which should work for welfare of people. This is the basic idea of Locke, right? So we can see the different influence, right? How Filmer influenced Locke, how Hobbes influenced Locke. So Locke's perspective is quite opposite to that of the Filmer, that of the Hobbes, right? So, but Sidney has a major influence, positive influence on Locke, which we will be seeing in the later slide when we will be doing his second treatise on the civil government. That is also a magnum opus. That is also talking about his most prominent idea on the origin of state. Okay, so let's start with his first magnum opus, that is first treatise on civil government. Okay, so he was contemporary of Hobbes. Okay, who was contemporary of Hobbes? Basically, Locke was contemporary of Hobbes. It is said that he wanted to challenge Hobbes' theory of absolute state. When we will analyze his first treatise on civil government, his basic idea will look like he is kind of challenging the theory of absolute state which was propounded by Hobbes. However, Hobbes' work became controversial and prohibited by church. We have already seen in the previous lecture that how Hobbes' work, that was Leviathan, was usually criticized by church and even bonfired. Why? Because of his counter-authoritative judgment against the church, right? He is kind of establishing a Leviathan state, a kind of sovereign state which will know no foundation or no limitations, right? Even the spiritual and temporal lords must bow down before this Leviathan, that the supreme lord, right, which was kind of against the authority which was the church during his time, and hence it was hugely and severely criticized and rebuked by the church, right? Hence he targeted the theory of absolute state given by Filmer in his book Patriarcha, right? Since Hobbes' magnum opus, that was Leviathan, which was already in criticism by church and prohibited by the people and the church, it became kind of very light task for Locke to neglect that particular work, and hence he refocused on the work of Filmer, that was Patriarcha. Okay, because Filmer was also kind of talking about an absolute state. Filmer was critic of theory of social contract. He criticized the theory of social contracts on two grounds. Okay, so basically, though Hobbes propounded the idea of Leviathan, that was his absolute state, it was still based on social contract, that people will decide their absolute authority. People will come into the mutual agreement to decide their absolute authority. But in case of Filmer, it was even opposite to that of the Hobbes, because he was entirely the critic of social contract. He criticized social contract on basically the two grounds. What are the two grounds? The first ground is it is not logical theory of the authority of state, right? So basically, Filmer is criticizing the theory of social contract on the basis of two grounds, right? What is the first ground? So Filmer is saying the first ground is that it is not logical theory of the state of authority of the state, right? Let's see why it is not logical, right? So Filmer is saying that contract means will of the man, right? Contract is basically will of the man. Even Hobbes has explicited that particular idea, that on the basis of the will of the man, people will come into a mutual agreement and they will formulate their social contract, right? And hence the basic definition of contract is the will of the man. It means the authority of the state is based on the will of the man. Okay, authority of the state will be based upon the will of the man. If authority is on the will of the man, it is illogical to accept future generation to accept the contract entered by their forefathers. This is very logical point. This was also one of the major criticism of Hobbes, right? As the absolute state will based on will of the man during a particular time, is it logical that the same will also be applicable to the future generations? Is that logical? Will that same social contract which was formulated by the forefathers, will that be still acceptable to the people or the great grandchildren? That is the first ground. That is the first ground, which is kind of sounding illogic to Filmer. The social contract which was formulated by my grandfather, will that be acceptable to me? Right? Because my time is different, my situation is different, my place might be different. Right? So that is the first ground. What is the second ground? With respect to right to property. Right? He is criticizing social contract on the second ground, that is right to property. Heredity rather than contract is more logical basis of right to property. Right? We will see what this is when we'll talk about Locke on property, Locke's perspective on property. Okay, here he is propounding the idea that heredity is more logical right to property than contract. Right? So this will make more sense when we will talk about his perspective on property. Okay, so according to Filmer, state is patriarcha. Right? So basically now we are seeing his theory of divine origin of state. Okay, what is Filmer thought on divine origin of state? Okay, so according to Filmer, state is patriarcha. What is patriarcha? Big family of God. State is a big family of God. Right? So patriarcha here means a big family of God. Adam was the first king. Adam was son of God. Right? Adam was the first king, and hence Adam was the son of God. All successive kings are heirs of Adam. Okay, and after Adam, all the successive kings of Adam were the direct heirs of Adam. Since Adam had absolute authority, kings also have absolute authority. This is basically a divine origin of state. Right? Adam was the first king. Adam was the first man, and Adam was the direct son of God. And all the kings or the people are the direct descendants of Adam. Okay, they have also the divine right to rule over the citizens, and they will also have the absolute authority. This is what a Filmer's idea of divine origin of state is. Okay, so what is Locke's criticism of Filmer? Why Locke is criticizing Filmer on what basis? Okay, because Locke is kind of challenging Filmer's idea of absolute state. Right? So let's see on what basis, on what ground Locke is criticizing Filmer. Okay, he rejects the theory that state is created by God. Right? He is basically refuting the idea of divine origin of state, which was the basic premise of Filmer's absolute state. Even if we believe Adam was the first king, but such event happened in very remote period of history. Right? The history which we are not sure of. Can that be scientifically proven? Right? No. That's why Locke is criticizing Filmer on the basis that even if we believe that Adam was the first king, right, that particular event was happened in very remote period of history. At present, there are so many kings. How to identify who is the genuine heir of Adam? Right? Filmer was basically propounding the idea that Stuart monarchy must be reestablished. Right? Why he should be reestablished according to Filmer? Because on the basis of divine origin of state. Right? This was his logic, that the Stuart dynasty should be reestablished. Why? Because of divine origin of state. That the king of Stuart monarchy was the direct descendant of Adam, who was the first king, who was the son of God. And hence here Locke is criticizing or refuting his idea by saying that even if we accept that Adam was the first king, how will we genuinely accept the idea that the Stuart monarch was the genuine heir of Adam. How will we know that? How can we genetically test it? Do we have a genetic identity of Adam? How will we establish that? Or how will we identify who is the genuine heir of Adam? Because Filmer is propounding the idea that all the successive kings, being the son of Adam, will have the absolute authority to rule, because they are the direct descendant of Adam. Adam being the first king, he is the son of God. So this is the first basis on which Locke is criticizing Filmer. Hence, he suggests to look for the new basis of the authority of the state rather than the basis of Adam's theory or the divine origin of state. Right? Hence, Locke is establishing the idea that we should start looking for the new basis of the authority of the state rather than propounding the idea of divine origin of state, or on the basis of Adam's theory, that is, God created the state. Okay. So this is the ground. So let's see. Let's continue it. Locke also rejected the theory of absolute authority of state. He argues that authority of state cannot be absolute. Right? First, he have already refuted what? He have refuted Filmer's idea of divine origin of state. Now, Locke is also refuting the idea of absolute authority of state. Why? Because he is propounding the idea that state is not a family. Okay? He is propounding the idea that state is not a family, rather a family of families. Okay? State is not a family. Right? Why he is rendering or giving this particular analogy, we will see just right now. Okay? Here he is propounding the idea which needs to be taken into consideration is that state is not a family, rather state is family of families. This is the idea of Aristotle. Okay? If you have seen the series of Aristotle, he has also said in his theory on state that state is not a family, rather a family of families. Authority of king cannot be at par with the authority of patriarch or father. Okay? Basically, the idea or the story here is that if there is a family, there is one family where there is a head or a father who has the absolute authority over the family members. Right? Since state is not a family but a family of families, here the father's absolute authority will not work. Right? Father's authority is absolute in the family because children are completely dependent on the father. Right? Here, father has an absolute authority over their subject because they are completely dependent on the father. Right? Citizens, but when it comes to state, right, which is a family of families, the citizens are adult. They are dependent on the state only for few matters. They are not completely dependent. They are autonomous. They are dependent on the state only for few matters. Hence, hence authority of state cannot be absolute. Right? Here, Locke is propounding the idea that since state is family of families where there are many small families, okay, the families or the citizens are not completely dependent upon the state. They are only dependent upon the state only for a few matters. Hence, authority of state cannot be absolute. Right? He is basically kind of correlating the state with family. Right? There is a small family where there is a father who is having absolute authority. Why? Because the subjects or children are completely dependent upon the fathers. Right? Hence, father can exercise absolute authority of them on them. Why? Because they are completely dependent on the father. The state is not like that. Why? Because state is not a family. State is basically a family of families where there are citizens. There are many citizens with different needs, with different requirements, with different exercises. Right? And they are not completely dependent upon one father. Right? They are not completely dependent. And hence, since they are not completely dependent, the father will not have the absolute authority or cannot have the absolute authority. This is what Locke is saying. Locke gives the labor theory of property. What is labor theory of property? Property belongs to that person who has put his labor, right? So what is property or wealth here? Basically, the power Okay, the absolute power. Who will have the absolute power in the family of the families? Who has put his absolute, or who has put more labor among the citizens? He will basically have power. Okay, Locke's view are very similar to that of Aristotle, which I have just said. In the words of Aristotle, the authority of masters differs from the authority of statesmen. Right? The authority of masters will differ from the authority of statesmen. Okay. So this was all about the first part of Locke, and I am hoping that you guys have enjoyed the basic introduction, his influences, his works, and his theory of uh, his theory of his basic criticism of Filmer's idea. Okay, and his criticism of absolute state. And upon this basic premise, we will be building his concepts on secondary thesis, that is his theory of origin of state, that is his perspective on social contract, right? Which are the very precious or important content of his second treatise, that is his second treatise on civil government, which is also one of the very eminent book of John Locke, right? That we will be dealing in tomorrow's lecture. That will be part second of Locke, right? So with this we come to the conclusion, and I wish you all the best and all the great luck and success. Ensure to remember the motto statement of UPSC Gig by NRJ, that does you strive so you thrive. जितनी मेहनत आप करेंगे उतनी फल आपको मिलेंगी. With this, let's end today's lecture, people, and ensure to show your love by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Gig by NRJ. Also like the video, and if you have any thoughts or feedback, ensure to keep that in the comment section. I will have a look and come back with a valuable feedback. Thank you.